October 9, 2016. The Black Hills of South Dakota. Two experienced hunters walked into a forest they knew well, and only one of them came home. 7 years later, the one who returned would tell a story that made the sheriff close the case file without writing a single conclusion. The other hunter has never been found. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Michael, Carson, and Tom Brennan had been hunting together for 17 years. Every October, they would drive from Rapid City into the backcountry near Deerfield Lake, set up camp for 3 days, and come back with elk or stories worth telling. They were both in their early 50s, both quiet men who worked construction during the week and disappeared into the woods every chance they got. Their families knew the routine so well that when Michael's wife packed his gear that Thursday morning in 2016, she barely asked where they were headed. She already knew. The forecast that week was mild. Clear skies, temperatures in the low 40s at night, dry trails. Perfect conditions for an October hunt. Michael and Tom left Rapid City around 6 in the morning. Their truck loaded with the usual gear. Tents, sleeping bags, enough food for 4 days in case they decided to stay longer. They stopped for coffee at a gas station just outside Hill City, the last place anyone reported seeing them together. The clerk remembered them because they bought 2 packs of batteries, something neither of them had on their original packing list. They reached the trailhead at Ditch Creek Road by 9. Self-service cut out about 2 miles before that, which was normal. Neither Michael nor Tom carried satellite phones. They had been hunting this area for years and had never needed one. The trails were marked, the roads accessible, and they always told people exactly where they would be. That Thursday morning, Michael sent a text to his wife from the gas station that read, "Heading in now, back Sunday evening." She replied with a thumbs up. That was the last time she heard from him. The first 2 days of the hunt went exactly as planned, at least as far as anyone can piece together. On Saturday morning, a couple of hikers passed through the same area and reported seeing a campsite near the old logging road. They described 2 tents, a small fire pit, boots drying on a rock. The hikers waved from a distance but didn't stop to talk. They said the camp looked occupied and well-maintained. By their account, everything appeared routine, normal, safe. Sunday came, and neither Michael nor Tom returned to Rapid City. By 6 that evening, Michael's wife started calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Tom's number next. Same result. She told herself they were just delayed. Maybe tracking an elk. Maybe waiting for a better light to hike out. By 8, she called Tom's girlfriend, who said she had been trying to reach him all afternoon. That was when they started to worry. Monday morning, the Pennington County Sheriff's Office received 2 missing persons reports. Michael, Carson, and Tom Brennan, last known location Ditch Creek Road near Deerfield Lake. Expected return Sunday evening. No contact since Thursday morning. Deputies drove out to the trailhead that afternoon and found their truck parked exactly where they said it would be. The doors were locked. Nothing inside looked disturbed. The keys were gone. A deputy hiked in about 3 miles following the main trail and found the campsite the hikers had described. Both tents were still standing. Inside Michael's tent, his sleeping bag was rolled up neatly. A half-empty water bottle sat in the corner. Tom's tent looked similar, except for one detail that made the deputy stop. Tom's boots were inside the tent, laces still tied, sitting next to his backpack. Not outside drying like the hikers had reported. Inside, the rest of the camp was clean. No food left out, no trash, no signs of an animal intrusion. The fire pit had been used recently, but the ashes were cold. A pot sat beside it, washed and turned upside down to dry. Everything about the site suggested they had intended to come back. But something about those boots stayed with the deputy. He radioed it in and waited for the search team. By Tuesday morning, search and rescue crews from 3 counties had mobilized. Dogs, helicopters, ground teams on foot, all working a grid pattern out from a campsite. The terrain around Deerfield Lake is dense with ponderosa pine and thick underbrush, broken up by rocky outcroppings and steep ravines. Visibility in some areas drops to less than 20 feet. It is the kind of forest where someone can be 50 yards away and you would never see them. The search continued for 9 days. They found no clothing, no gear, no tracks leading away from the camp. On the third day, a crew discovered a rifle about a quarter-mile west of the campsite, leaning against a tree. It was identified as Michael's, fully loaded, safety on. The rifle showed no signs of damage, no fingerprints other than Michael's, no evidence it had been fired recently. It was simply there, placed almost carefully, as if someone had set it down to rest and then forgotten it. But Michael was not the kind of man who forgot his rifle. On day 6, they found something else. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch about 2 miles north of the camp, red and black plaid, consistent with the jacket Tom had been wearing. The fabric was high up, roughly 7 feet off the ground, which struck the lead searcher as unusual. The branch it was caught on was thin, barely strong enough to hold the weight of a squirrel. It had not been torn violently. The edges were frayed as if it had been rubbed repeatedly against the bark over time. But there was no blood on the fabric, no other pieces of clothing nearby, just that single scrap. By October 18th, the official search was suspended. The sheriff held a press conference and said what sheriffs always say in these situations. The area had been thoroughly covered. All leads had been exhausted. The case will remain open and active. He did not say what everyone in the room was thinking. 9 days without food or water in October. Temperatures dropping into the 30s at night. If Michael and Tom were still out there, they were not coming back alive. Michael's wife refused to believe it. She organized volunteer search parties every weekend for the next 2 months. Friends, family, other hunters who knew the area, all walking the same trails the official teams had already covered. They found nothing. By December, snow made the forest impassable. The searches stopped. The case went cold. For 7 years, the families lived with that uncertainty. Tom's girlfriend eventually moved to Colorado. Michael's wife stayed in Rapid City, waiting for a phone call that never came. Every few months, someone would report a sighting. A hiker thought they saw a man matching Michael's description near Harney Peak. A camper found initials carved into a tree that might have been Tom's. None of it led anywhere. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office followed up on every tip, but the file grew thicker without ever getting closer to an answer. Then, in September 2023, a ranger in Custer State Park received a call about a man acting strangely near a picnic area. The ranger drove out and found someone sitting on a bench, staring at the tree line. The man was thin, sunburned, wearing clothes that did not fit correctly. When the ranger approached, the man looked up and said his name was Tom Brennan. He said he needed to speak to someone about Michael Carson. The ranger did not believe him at first. Tom Brennan had been missing for 7 years, presumed dead. The ranger asked for identification, and the man pulled out a South Dakota driver's license that had expired in 2017. The photo matched. The birth date matched. The ranger called in immediately, and within 2 hours, deputies had Tom Brennan sitting in an interview room at the sheriff's office. Tom did not look like a man who had been missing for 7 years. He looked like someone who had spent a very long time outside, but not in a state of constant survival. His hands were calloused, but clean. His clothes were worn, but not torn. He had a beard and his hair was longer than anyone remembered, but he was not malnourished. He was not injured. He was just there, sitting quietly, waiting to tell his story. The interview lasted 4 hours, and what Tom described did not align with anything the investigators expected. He said that on the third day of their hunt, October 9th, 2016, he and Michael had split up after breakfast. Michael wanted to check the ridge line to the west. Tom planned to scout the drainage to the north. They agreed to meet back at camp by 3 in the afternoon. Tom said he followed the trail for about an hour before he heard something behind him. Not footsteps exactly, more like movement through the brush, deliberate and slow. He stopped and turned around but saw nothing. He continued walking and the sound followed. He called out, thinking it might be Michael, but got no response. That was when he noticed the forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his own breathing and whatever was moving behind him. Tom said he felt watched, not by an animal, by something that understood what he was doing and was adjusting its behavior accordingly. He picked up his pace. By the time he reached a small clearing, Tom said he turned around and saw a figure stand about 30 yards back, partially obscured by trees. He described it as man-shaped but too tall, over 7 feet, with proportions that seemed wrong. He did not see a face. The figure did not move. Tom raised his rifle and shouted for it to identify itself. Nothing. He fired a warning shot into the air, and the figure stepped back into the trees and disappeared. Tom said he ran. He did not know how long or in what direction. When he finally stopped, he had no idea where he was. The trail was gone. The landmarks he recognized were gone. He tried to retrace his steps, but everything looked the same. Dense trees, rocky ground, no clear path. He walked for hours and the sun started to set. That was when he realized he did not have his pack. He had dropped it when he ran. No food, no water, no emergency gear, just his rifle and the clothes on his back. He spent that first night under a fallen tree, shivering, listening to sounds he could not identify. By morning, he was disoriented. He walked in what he thought was the direction of camp, but after several hours, he found himself at the edge of a ravine he did not recognize. He tried to climb down and slipped, tumbling about 15 feet before catching himself on a ledge. He said he hurt his ankle, but it was not broken. He could still walk. For 3 days, Tom wandered. He found a creek and followed it downstream, assuming it would lead to a road or a trail. It did not. The creek disappeared into an underground channel, and he was back in dense forest with no reference point. On the 4th night, he said he saw lights in the distance. Flashlights, maybe, or headlamps. He shouted and started running toward them, but the lights moved away. He chased them for over an hour, and they stayed just out of reach, weaving between trees, appearing and disappearing. When he finally stopped, exhausted, the lights vanished completely. Tom said that was when he realized something was deliberately keeping him in the forest. He did not explain what he meant by that. The detective asked him to clarify, and Tom just shook his head. He said he stopped trying to find his way out. Instead, he focused on staying alive. He found shelter in a shallow cave. He ate whatever he could forage. Berries, roots, the occasional fish from a stream he found nearby. He lost track of time. Days blurred into weeks. He said he saw Michael once, or thought he did, standing at the edge of the tree line one morning. Tom called out to him, but Michael did not respond. He just stood there, staring, and then walked back into the trees. Tom never saw him again. The detective asked Tom how he survived 7 years in the Black Hills without being found. Tom said he did not stay in one place. He moved constantly, following patterns he could not fully explain. He said the forest changed around him. Trails that should have been there were not. Roads he remembered walking past in previous years had disappeared. He said it felt like the forest was rearranging itself, keeping him inside. When the detective pressed for specifics, Tom became vague. He said he lost most of his memory of the middle years. There were long stretches where he could not remember what he did or where he went. He just kept moving. He did not know how he ended up at the picnic area in Custer State Park. He said one day he looked up and the forest was different. The trees were thinner. The trails were marked. He followed a dirt road for several miles and found himself standing at the edge of a parking lot. That was when he flagged down the ranger. The sheriff's office ran every test they could think of. They checked Tom's medical records, interviewed him multiple times, brought in specialists to assess his mental state. Physically, he was in better condition than expected for someone who claimed to have lived outdoors for 7 years. No signs of prolonged malnutrition. No major injuries. No frostbite scarring despite multiple winters in sub-zero temperatures. A psychologist evaluated him and found no evidence of psychosis or delusion. Tom was lucid, coherent, and consistent in his story. He just could not explain how he survived or why he never found his way out sooner. Investigators returned to the area where Michael and Tom had originally gone missing. They searched the grid again, this time with Tom guiding them. He led them to the cave where he said he had sheltered. It was there. He showed them the creek where he fished. It was there. But when they asked him to show them where he last saw Michael, Tom walked them in circles for 2 hours and finally admitted he could not find it. He said the area looked completely different now. Nothing matched his memory. They never found Michael Carson. No remains, no clothing, no evidence he had been in the forest at all after October 9th, 2016. The rifle they had found 7 years earlier was still the only physical trace of him. Tom's story provided no useful leads. He could not explain where Michael went or what happened to him. He could only say that Michael had been there, and then he was not. The case officially remains open, but there is nothing left to investigate. Tom Brennan returned and could not tell anyone why. Michael Carson disappeared and left behind a single rifle and a campsite that looked like someone planned to come back. The families have no answers. The sheriff has no conclusions. The forest keeps its secrets. Tom does not talk about it anymore. He moved to Montana shortly after the interviews concluded and cut contact with almost everyone he knew. The few people who still speak to him say he refuses to go into forests. He will not camp, will not hike, will not even walk through a wooded park. When asked why, he gives the same response every time. He says the forest is not what people think it is. He says there are places where the rules stop applying, and if you cross into one of those places, you might not come back the same, or you might not come back at all. Michael's wife visits the Black Hills once a year, usually in October. She walks the trails near Ditch Creek Road, the same ones the search teams covered 7 years ago. She does not expect to find anything. She just wants to be there, in the last place her husband was known to exist. She says the forest feels different now, quieter. She says sometimes when the wind picks up, she hears something that sounds like footsteps behind her. She turns around and there is nothing, just trees and shadows and the faint smell of pine. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office still receives tips about the case. Most of them are easy to dismiss. A hiker thought they saw someone matching Michael's description near Harney Peak. A camper found a jacket that might have been his. None of it has led anywhere. But every few months, someone calls in with the same strange detail. They were hiking alone near Deerfield Lake, and they felt watched. They heard movement in the trees that stopped when they stopped. They saw lights that did not belong to any camper or ranger. The deputies write it down, file it, and move on. There are dozens of cases like this. Experienced outdoorsmen who walk into familiar forests and vanish. Some are found weeks later, miles from where they should have been, with no memory of how they got there. Others are never found at all. The patterns are there if you look for them. Missing gear that turns up in places it should not be. Tracks that end abruptly with no explanation. Reports of lights or figures that move just beyond the edge of vision. The official reports call it disorientation, exposure, panic. They do not call it what the people who come back always seem to describe. Something deliberate, something aware. Tom Brennan is one of the few who returned, and even he cannot explain what happened. He says the forest let him go. That is the phrase he used in his final interview before leaving South Dakota. The detective asked what he meant, and Tom just shook his head. He said some places do not operate on the same logic as the rest of the world. You can walk into them with all the preparation and experience in the world, and it will not matter. If the forest decides to keep you, it keeps you. If it decides to let you go, you leave. But you leave different, and you never go back. Michael's family wanted closure, and instead, they got a man who walked out of the woods after 7 years with a story that answered nothing. Tom wanted to tell them what happened, and realized he could not. The words existed, but they did not fit together in a way that made sense to anyone who had not been there. So the case stays open, filed under missing persons, unsolved, and every October, when the leaves start to turn and the hunters head into the Black Hills, someone at the sheriff's office pulls a file and reads through it one more time. Not because they expect to find something new. Just to remember, the forest does not give up its dead. It does not offer explanations. It simply exists, vast and indifferent, and the people who walk into it either come back or they do not. Michael Carson did not. Tom Brennan did. But the man who returned was not quite the same as the one who left. His family noticed it first. The way he startled at sudden movements. The way he avoided windows that looked out onto trees. The way he would stop mid-conversation and stare at nothing, as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. A year after his return, Tom sent a letter to the sheriff. It was brief, handwritten, and it did not clarify anything. He wrote that he wished he could have brought Michael back. He wrote that he tried, in the moments when his memory was clear enough to act. He wrote that Michael had made a choice and Tom could not follow him. The letter ended with a single line. If someone goes into those woods looking for him, tell them not to. He is not lost. He is where he chose to be. The sheriff read the letter, filed it with the rest of the case documents, and did not share it with Michael's family. There was no point. It would not bring Michael home. It would not explain what happened. It would only add more questions to a case that already had too many. So the letter sits in file, unread by anyone except a few deputies who know it exists. And the forest stays silent. At this point, you have to ask yourself what you would believe if you were standing in that interview room, listening to Tom describe 7 years that should not have been survivable. Would you call it trauma? Delusion? A memory fracture by prolonged isolation? Or would you consider the possibility that there are places in this world where the normal rules do not apply, and if you walk far enough into them, you might find yourself somewhere that was never meant to be found? The official explanation is that Tom Brennan suffered a psychological break, wandered deeper into the forest than anyone searched, and survived through a combination of luck and skills he could not consciously recall using. The official explanation is that Michael Carson died somewhere in those woods, likely within the first week, and his remains were never recovered due to terrain and wildlife. The official explanation fits into a framework people can accept. It closes the loop. It allows the case to be filed away. But the families do not accept it. Michael's wife does not believe her husband died in the first week. She says he was too experienced, too careful. Tom's account does not bring her comfort because it does not make sense. She has asked him repeatedly to tell her what really happened, and every time he gives the same answer. He does not know. He was there, and he does not know. 7 years is a long time to be missing. Long enough that most people assume the worst and start the process of moving on. But Tom came back, and his return reopened every wound of families that started to heal. Because now they have to live with the knowledge that survival was possible. Michael could have made it. He could still be out there. And if he is, why has he not come home? Tom has been asked that question more times than he can count. His answer never changes. He says Michael did not want to come home. That is the part that no one can accept. That is the part that makes the sheriff close the file without conclusions. Because if Michael chose to stay in the forest, it raises a question no one wants to confront. What could be out there that would make a man choose to never come back? The Black Hills have always had stories. Long before settlers arrived, the indigenous tribes spoke of areas within the forest that were avoided, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, where the living could cross into something else if they were not careful. The stories were dismissed as folklore, myths meant to keep people from wandering too far. But every few years, someone disappears. And every few years, the stories get a little harder to dismiss. Tom Brennan is not the first person to return from the Black Hills with a story that does not fit. In 1983, a trapper walked out of the forest after being missing for 4 months. He claimed he had been living in a cabin that did not appear on any map. When authorities went looking for it, they found nothing. In 1997, a teenager vanished during a school camping trip and reappeared 2 weeks later with no memory of where she had been. She said she remembered walking in circles, seeing the same tree over and over until one day the trail was there again and she followed it out. She never went back into the woods. These cases do not make headlines because they do not have clear villains or obvious explanations. They are filed under exposure, hypothermia, mental breaks, and the people who come back are quietly advised to move on. But the pattern exists. People walk into the Black Hills, and some of them come back different. And the ones who do not come back leave behind gear that look staged, campsites that look abandoned mid-task, and families that spend the rest of their lives wondering what they missed. Michael Carson is still missing. The file is still open. The forest is still there, waiting for the next hunter who thinks they know the trails well enough to walk them alone. And somewhere in a small house in Montana, Tom Brennan wakes up every morning and avoids looking at the trees outside his window because he knows what is out there. He just cannot explain it in a way that anyone would believe. Cases like this do not disappear. They just fade when people stop asking questions. But the questions never really stop. They just get quieter. Michael's wife still asks. Tom's old friends still wonder. And every October, when the hunters load their trucks and head into the Black Hills, someone remembers the story of the two men who went into a forest and only one came back. They remember and they pack an extra battery for their phone. They tell someone exactly where they're going. They promise to check in. And sometimes late at night, when they're sitting alone by the fire and the forest goes silent around them, they wonder what would happen if they stood up and walked into the trees. If they followed that feeling of being watched. If they chased those lights that appear just beyond the edge of the campfire glow. Most of them shake it off, go to sleep, and hike out in the morning. But some of them do not. Some of them take that first step, and the forest closes around them. What do you think happened to Michael Carson? Do you believe Tom's account, or do you think there is something he is not telling us? Let us know in the comments below.